Okay, so you're a Christian minister,
Yeah.
right? And I'm a person who grew up with absolutely no religion, and gravitated towards Buddhism and spent many years practicing Buddhism. I have a little Buddha in the corner here, so we can have Buddha speaking to Christ on a symbolic level here somehow. So, in a way, I wanted to frame it around that. As someone who's practiced a lot of Buddhism, talking to a Christian, but I'm also somebody who's obviously Western, and obviously I've studied, I've absorbed Christianity through my readings and studying a lot, and most of the reading I do these days is in Judeo-Christian tradition, and try to understand that. And part of that, a lot of my interest in Peterson has been really when I was a student. I read Nietzsche, I read Dostoevsky, I read almost the same books as he had on his reading list. I never became a Christian. I went into Zen Buddhism, but I still, let's say I've been having this conversation with Christianity on an internal level. So as a person like that, right, who doesn't belong to any particular tradition, but with some history in Buddhism, maybe there were some questions. Well, the first question I want to ask you is, why the obsession with Peterson? That's the first question. Why the obsession of Peterson from a person who is, a traditionalist? Like, you've grown up in the church, I understand, and your father was a minister, and you have this deep traditional, background, and I don't, and both of us, I think the thing we have in common in the past couple of years have been thinking and writing obsessively about Peterson. So I want to maybe we could talk about both of our angles on that, or both of our, why we're doing this.
Okay. So I found Peterson, I think I first found him when I read a Rod Dreher posting about him protesting the pronouns. And I thought, why is a University of Toronto psychology professor making a big deal about this? I thought that was interesting. And then I bumped into him again somewhere online. And then I saw the video of the protesters. And what struck me was how he maintained his calm demeanor in the face of the anger being thrown at him. And to me, that was very Jesus-like. And so that caught my attention. And then I'm obsessive about ideas. Like in 2006, I started a tear on Tim Keller, and I probably listened to most of his sermons. Now, Tim Keller preaches every week for decades. And so I can process tons of audible material. I'm an auditory learner. I'm a bit dyslexic. So I read fine, but I can process audible material very, very well. So Peterson had all this YouTube stuff. And so that was an easy match. And then I saw he's doing biblical lectures. And then I saw he's selling out. People are paying to listen to him ramble about the Bible for 2+ hours. And I know some really excellent preachers in Toronto that have plenty of empty seats in their churches. And I said, I need to find out why. And so then I started listening to his biblical series, and then I was just hooked. Mm-hmm. I just kept going. All the biblical series, maps of meaning, personalities, everything I could find online that he did. So that's a lot of material. And again, like I said, I process audible material very quickly, and I retain it very easily. So
I can relate to that. Yeah.
And then I'm processing this, and I'm blogging, because I'd always blog, and I blog like I do videos. I just vomit onto the page. But I was at the same time reading. I'm always reading 4 or 5 or 15 audiobooks at a time. Too many, really. And I was going through Neil Postman again because of the Trump election. Uh-huh. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what's happening in the culture? And so then I was also doing Peterson and Neil Postman. And I said, I really need to try to make some videos about Jordan Peterson. And I had been playing around with videos. A guy in my church said, Paul, you and I, let's do a TV show. It's like, yeah, right. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just use my camera and we'll do these little 5-minute shows. We'll call it the Freddie and Paul Show, and we'll just do whatever we feel like. No rehearsing, just put it on the screen. And that was the start of the Freddie and Paul Show, and I'd done that for about a year. I had about 15 subscribers, mostly church people and family members who are watching the Freddie and Paul Show. And I do my second video about Jordan Peterson, and my channel just starts to go up, and that's like, well, this is strange. And everything's just kept going since then.
Okay. Well, my story is a little bit similar. I mean, I sort of discovered, let's say, Facebook. I started writing actually on Facebook. I started writing poems and essays, and I was using Facebook almost as a writing, like a writing forum or something. I was getting all this feedback on my writing, and people were following me and this kind of thing. And then I started the Medium. And then I started writing things on Medium. And I would say that my writing was, not particularly, I had about 20 people reading my posts and something like that. And now I've got an average of about, sometimes I have 1,000 people reading my little Medium articles, right, on Medium, which is completely strange. And during this whole process of discovering Peterson and writing about Peterson, I also lost friends, because I tended to write from a very social justice orientation. And it was never really my orientation of social justice in the sense of being very political, but I would say that I had a lot of friends on the left who are very social justice oriented. And then suddenly I just was taken by Peterson and started writing about Peterson, and the split kind of happened between, the people who were interested in me before and then the people who are, interested in me now. And I found all these people sort of who are not from my world at all, very almost some right-wing people coming and talking to me. And this was my whole, let's say, around the time of, the Trump election and Peterson, my whole social world sort of shifted in some kind of way towards almost the center and very much talking to people I wouldn't normally talk to in my world, in my bubble, or, and then David Fuller picked up one of my articles, and then Peterson tweeted it, and then suddenly it's like suddenly there's it's a very modest following, but suddenly there's a reason for me to write for an audience rather than just being writing for myself, which is kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think part of what you and I have in common then is we both kind of started over on the left, and that had happened to me before. I'd always been on the left side of my denomination, which is a very conservative denomination, but I'd always been on the left because of where I grew up and my father's work and my work. And I think in the Christian church, people haven't really defriended me, but I deeply suspect that a lot of my friends over on the left are really troubled by what I'm doing. But in Christianity acts as kind of a buffer in that. They're not going to attack me. Nobody's going to call me a bigot because of my background and where I work and who I work with. But people, why are you doing this with that man?
What I've learned from this whole experience is to have some sort of, let's say, compassion for people who are a bit more conservative than me, and learn to understand what conservative means, and even had a feeling that it's essential part of our nature, right? It's trait conscientiousness, it's security, it's self-protection, it's all of these things which are actually important, and that even within ourselves we have this. Like I'm very high in trait openness and very low in conscientiousness. So I've never been a conservative, but I realize that the part of me that needs to maybe develop is I need to become more, become more conscientious, or I need to learn how to discriminate and distinguish between right and wrong, and I need to be more black and white and less relativistic in my view of the world. So there's a part of me that's quite attracted to well, just at least understanding traditionalism and conservatism and all that, partly because I felt so far outside of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been moderately high in conscientiousness. So, but I'm also very high in openness. So, and being again a pastor, I've had to navigate and really integrate a lot of that. My father was the same way. So that wasn't, I've always had a capacity, and again, I got this from my father too. I've always had a capacity to get along across the aisle. So I've always known how to talk to conservatives, and part of that is because I grew up in a very conservative religious tradition. So I understand conservatism, and I understand why they have the reactions that they have. But I also understand liberals because I'm very high in openness. So that's never been an issue for me. Right. Even though it's an issue for a lot of liberals and conservatives.
It's an issue for me. I grew up with a lesbian mom. I've been soaked in progressivism my entire life, and I've grown up outside of any kind of traditionalism. So again, it's kind of why it's interesting for me to talk to somebody like you who has you have such grounding in tradition.
Well, one of the fun things about this journey for me is just meeting all these new people and hearing everyone's stories, because as a pastor, that's what I do. It's if you're going to, people are their stories in many ways. And so when people share their story with you, they share themselves. And to me, it's just fascinating. People just fascinate me. So especially interesting people like yourself. And so when you say my mother was a lesbian, I'm like, I got to hear about this. Tell me more about this. And I can talk to people forever. So,
well, one of the other things that I've been thinking about in terms of this whole Peterson business is how the male archetype has been maligned since probably the 1960s, and is especially visible since the election of Donald Trump, who kind of comes across as this sort of pathological male, right? To a lot of people, from where I come from, to the point where people are almost hysterical about the man. And then at the same time that he arises, then Peterson comes up, and he represents, let's say, the good father archetype. And I guess since I've been raised, I have a father, but my dog is pushing the microphone here. I have a little dog.
Let me see your little dog. Pull him
wait, yeah. You gotta meet him. His name is Walt, and he's
a pug.
He's a pug. He's a pug. I named him after Walt Whitman, not Walt Disney, but I sometimes call him Walter Benjamin, and he's very intelligent. But it's 33 degrees here in Paris, and so he's in a sort of state of I don't know, heat. So he's just sleeping around all day. He's a pug. Yeah, he's a.
Oh, hey, Walt. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So
I think your thoughts about masculinity and femininity are dead on, because culturally, I think there's a crisis in both masculinity and femininity, because what we've done is, I think we have also lost, we've told men they can't be masculine, and we've told women they must be masculine. And so culturally, we have lost the power for women to understand the power of the feminine in a healthy, powerful way. If you look at, again and again, we hear in movies that, we need strong women. And when they say strong women, they're saying we need masculine women. And obviously with a male, you have your masculinity and your femininity, and with a female, you have your masculinity and your femininity. But we keep emphasizing the masculine for the women, and we keep de-emphasizing the masculine in the men. And it's no wonder we've got this chaos.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything virtuous about this chaos? About, let's say, I always think about, I don't know, have you heard the Zen phrase, first there are mountains and rivers, and then there are not mountains and rivers, and then there are mountains and rivers again?
Huh. No, I've never heard
Have
that.
you heard that phrase? I don't know
No.
if you've read any Zen, but in other words, first there's men and then there's women, right? And they have very defined roles. Yeah. And then I guess in the 60s, all of these roles sort of, blend into each other and get confused and get kind of lost. And women, we have women's liberation and all, there's this, maybe that's like the postmodern stage, right? Where, men and women, where I grew up, I had no concern with masculinity whatsoever. It wasn't a concern, for me. I had long hair, in fact, I almost identified more with the feminine. Yeah. So it was only later, becoming an adult right now, I have some kind of interest in what masculinity is and what it means. So I think it's like a loss and then a recovery, and I wonder if that also is mirrored by the loss of tradition, right? And the recovery of tradition.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think culturally, we usually just keep swinging back and forth because to maintain balance is really hard. I would say, as a Calvinist, I'd say probably unattainable for us. And so we're always going to be wobbling. And I think part of what Peterson has really helped me with, I think he's given me a language to talk about some of these dynamics, to talk about order and chaos, to talk about, we do wobble. And so we swing a certain way and then we self-correct and we swing the other way. The hierarchies and corruption. And, I think a lot of that stuff has been tremendously helpful to me.
Yeah. Well, why do you think it is that people are not going to church? Like, there must be fantastic ministers out there, who are extremely enlightened and I've certainly met with in the Buddhist tradition, people who have a sublimity of an expression, and why are people going outside of these institutions to learn about the institutions, to learn about the traditions? Why is Peterson speaking from outside of a tradition? Why is that seem to be necessary? And why is the whole culture sort of, I don't know how to say that, but it seems to be this loss of tradition, and then the only way we can come back to the tradition is through the loss of the tradition, unless we're born into it like you are and can. Does that make any sense?
Many who are born into it leave it too.
Right.
I think part of it is, as he talks about, the corruption of hierarchies, that order, institutions preserve order and reinforce order, and if they don't, churches are always dealing with order chaos issues all the time. Individual churches, denominations, traditions, they're always dealing with that. Part of I think individualism and loss of community, I think part of it is the amount of power we have as individuals that we didn't used to have. It used to be that families and institutions like churches were far more necessary for human beings to maintain themselves over time. And I think the rise of state power has taken a lot away of both families and churches. The state has stepped into roles that families and churches used to play.
Right.
And so I think that's a piece of it. Churches, there's always a dynamic too in terms of community, that if you're going to have a rich, effective, powerful community, there needs to be an insularity, but that insularity in and of itself keeps people out. And so one of the things that I see all the time is that a tradition like mine, the Christian Reformed Church, is highly insular because it was an immigrant church. So the Christian Reformed Church is really wrestling with, us and them. And so in the 60s, the Christian Reformed Church had this huge guilt about them. And so it's been trying to do them, but then losing the usness of it. And again, it's like an order chaos thing. We're always trying to work those polarities, and those things are always nearly impossible to get correct. And so churches are doing a lot of this stuff.
So what would you say? Sorry to interrupt. What would you say about, I think if I would say one thing that frightens me about churches in general is dogma, right? And I think that's the thing that pushes young people away from church, is that this idea that the church has all of these dogmas, right? And that they seem to be arbitrary, and we can live without them. So why should we follow, Catholic dogma or Calvinist dogma? Like, how would you describe dogma to, this is one thing I just, how would you defend Christian dogma?
Well, I think the first thing that a lot of people who are outside, they don't have a lot of experience in church,
Mm-hmm.
don't understand is the enormous diversity within church,
Right.
about what people believe. There's a large, in churches, there's a large amount of shallow visible conformity that happens. But if you dig down, as a pastor, if you dig down into what people actually believe, it's nearly just as diverse as everything else outside. Mm-hmm. There are certain practices that tend to define the community, and often those practices are not explicit, but they're kind of embodied, and so people learn them. And so actually to get into a church, in some ways, you don't even have to believe anything that any of those people believe. If you just show up and kind of learn to adopt the external behaviors you're in, that is so incredibly common, even in a church like the Christian Reformed Church. Now, you get into certain levels of leadership and the dogma becomes more important. And my explanation for the dogma is that in order to actually be able to productively navigate change, you need a baseline. The dogma provides a sort of baseline. Mm-hmm. If you're going to have theme and variations, you need theme. And the dogma is not what I think a lot of outside people imagine it to be. Churches change. Many churches change, not all, but many churches change almost as much as everything else.
Well, I have a conservative Catholic friend, and he used to be a Stalinist, and now he's become a very conservative Catholic. And what he's always telling me is that I'm going to go to hell, right? And because I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
And
does that make you nervous?
Well, I think that he's projecting his hell on me, because I think the hell that he's going through, he's projecting on me the hell of his own mind and his own soul. Is, if he's going to go around, if he thinks that he has the authority to say that somebody else is going to go to hell because he's not a Christian, then I say, well, who are you? Or, who are you to say that? I mean, I know people who are Christian who are lovely, wonderful people. And then there's other Christians who are, terrible people. And then there's people who have absolutely no belief at all, who do wonderful things. I'm not what I'm doing now. I know there's, deep, profound truths in the Christian church, but I have a hard time with that aspect. Why people take that hard line. So I always want to talk to, I want to ask somebody who's a preacher about that.
I should probably be less selfish in my videos and start addressing some of these issues because they come up a lot. If you kind of emotionally take a step back and take a look at this dynamic, mm-hmm. a number of things will become evident. First of all, there's the relational layer to that interchange. Mm-hmm. And you can ask yourself, well, what's really going on beneath the surface of this interchange? Why is he telling me this? Well, it could be because you're his friend, and this is a belief that he has, it's a belief that he has via his religion. And so what he's really saying underneath the surface is, I love you and I'm concerned for you. Like, good. That's a happy thing. Mm-hmm. You might ask, why do I find this so disturbing? Obviously, a Muslim would think that I, as a Reformed minister, am going to hell. That doesn't bother me in the least. Why doesn't it bother me? Well, I think he's wrong. So then we might ask, culturally, where does this anxiety? It used to be an evangelistic technique that Christians would use. As Christians, I can pull a book out of our library that says, you go to someone's door, you knock on the door, and you'd say to them, if you were to die tonight, how would you and God were to say, why should I let you into my kingdom? What would you say? And in late 20th century North America, this was an effective evangelism technique to get people to start coming to church. Mm-hmm. Why? Because there are all these latent beliefs beneath the surface. This, we talk about now white guilt. Well, this was Christian guilt, and you could use that to motivate people to get active in a church. Now, if you start deconstructing this stuff, let's set aside the ontological claims. If you start deconstructing this stuff, what you're going to see is a whole lot of interesting things. One of the interesting things being what you just described afterwards, which is, hey, wait a minute. I see a whole bunch of Christians who are really awful people who say they're going to go to heaven, and all these really wonderful people who are doing good, they're going to go to hell. Well, what you've just described is your implicit beliefs about what heaven and hell are and who qualifies for each. Now you start deconstructing that, and well, then we can have actually a very interesting conversation. Because here's what's underneath it. The idea, okay, so let's imagine there's an afterlife. Okay, let's imagine, well, let's go to the Greeks. Let's look at Hades. Hades or Sheol in the Old Testament, kind of this gray place, maybe some differentiation. You can read in Plato's Republic where old men are a little anxious about dying, about the bad things that they've done. So you got this idea of kind of karma, where, preservation of moral energy. And then that continues to get developed and differentiated. And the differentiation in terms of do good in this life, suffer, receive reward in the next. And you begin to say, oh, where's this come from? Well, let's look at the books of the dead. You got the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Yeah. And you've got all these.
I could make the same sort of claim of people in the Buddhist tradition who I've met who believe that Buddhism is a sort of enlightened tradition and doesn't have this stuff. But if you go deep into the religion, you will find there's descriptions of hell that would make your hair stand on end. And
exactly.
And so this is present in all of the traditions.
That's right. So implicit in there is this idea that do good things, you're going to be rewarded in the afterlife. Do bad things, you're going to be punished in the afterlife. Okay, well, that's one frame. And when, in a sense, you're pushing back, many Christians come at this with a tribal frame. If you're part of our group, you'll be rewarded for being part of our group, regardless of what you've done in your life. And if you're not part of our group, you're going to be punished, regardless of what you've done in your life. So that's one frame. Yeah. And you've got the two frames that are butting up against each other. Implicit in your view is do good things, you'll be rewarded in the next life if there is an afterlife. Do bad things, you'll be punished in the next life if there is an afterlife. Now, you start to go into Christianity, and what you begin to discover is that there are various modalities of these frames that are going on. Both of those frames are present in Christianity. And then there's a third frame, which is something to the degree of, if you, let's use Jordan Peterson. Let's say if you're fascinated by Jordan Peterson, you would love to do nothing more than be Jordan Peterson's neighbor, so you think for now, and get to know him and have dinner with him and know his wife and know his kids. And if you hate Jordan Peterson, you would never want to be his neighbor because he would drive you crazy. Yeah. Well, the same thing goes with God. See, also implicit with this is heaven is like, I'll use US terms, heaven is like Santa Barbara. Hell is like Stockton or Oakland. Okay?
Okay.
But in terms of Christianity, heaven is about communion with God. Yeah. Hell is about
being separate, being separate from the divine, being lost,
exactly,
and living in a fragmented world where you feel no connection to anything, and that is hell, right?
That's right. So now we've got a third conception of, and see what happens so often, I would say in Christianity, is we've got these images, okay? One is the divorce from God or reconciliation with God. One is the reward or punishment in terms of this world. One is the inclusion or not inclusion in a group. I wouldn't say none of these things are true. I'd say all of these things are true, but all of these things are aspects which we are able to appropriate that get at what is at the center of this thing. Mm-hmm. Now, you might say, yeah, but there are differences, there are tensions between the three. And I'd say, yes, there are. But those tensions reveal that we're unable to actually integrate the three of them into what is probably reality. Similar to the fact that we see certain spectrums with our eyes. Lobsters see spectrums with their eyes. Is there a reality out there that both we and lobsters are able to see, but none of us can see it fully?
Right. Well,
it doesn't mean that we don't see it, lobsters don't see it. It's an either or.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So that kind of comes about, I sent you this list of, ideas or questions. And one of my question is, what is a Christian, right? And can you be a Christian outside the church, right? And then this comes back to Jordan Peterson. Is he a Christian outside the church? For me, it makes sense that Christ would be the ultimate archetype, right? Of goodness and sacrifice. That makes complete sense to me. But why would you need to identify yourself as a Christian to understand?
Well, I would recommend.
And Peterson doesn't, right? He doesn't. At least he doesn't explicitly, say that I'm a Christian. He says, "Well, depends what you mean by being a Christian, or depends what you mean by God." He won't allow himself any kind of dogmatic, formulaic. And I kind of appreciate that. On the other hand, I think, well, then what, where do you stand, sir? Like what, at a certain point, do we need to say, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or and take a stand in reality the best way we can?
So you're asking him to identify himself within the tribal frame. And he is saying,
I'm not going to do that.
I want to resist the tribal frame because I'm not at all sure framing it in this way. I would think that he says framing it in this way is going to distort the multiple frames in which I am trying to work these issues. Now, me, I can't help but frame myself in this way, and I'm very comfortable with the tribal frames. But I think, as a lot of people have noted in my channel, I've got a fair number of people like yourself who didn't grow up with religion but have been into Buddhism. This is one of the things that surprised me, how many, like Nathan Carey, I've done a couple of conversations with him. It shouldn't surprise me because I've got a lot of those kind of relationships in my life, in my real life, because that's where I live. And so that's probably been affecting my mental processes of this. But he's wanting to resist this frame because how this tribal frame is going to play out in his other agenda is going to distort him. So I think there's a tactical element to this that he's working on, but I think he's also completely sincere in saying he's answered the question both ways in a number of places.
Well, wouldn't saying I don't know, wouldn't that almost be more of a Christian statement than saying I believe and that's the truth? But wouldn't do you know what I mean? Like, does that make any sense? The fact that I won't define the unknowable thing, right? I won't say this is it, and you need to, I will remain within, let's say, the cloud of unknowing, or am I being?
That could be. I don't know that it's that esoteric for him. Here's an example. Someone says, I'm married, but I don't live with my spouse. Okay, well then, are you really married? Well, legally I'm married, but I don't live with my spouse. Well, are you really married? I mean, you can understand both sides of that question. And when you ask, can I, and this is an old question in terms of the United States, because there are so many people that call themselves Christians and they don't participate in a church. As a pastor, I would liken that to saying, I'm married, but I can't live with my wife.
I see.
Well, then you're not really married.
But that's not, doesn't seem to be the case with Peterson, because he seems to be attempting to imitate Christ in a sense, but outside the church.
That's right.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in terms of Christian theology, that would be something akin to saying, well, I'm married, but I don't live with my wife. And, if I want to have sex with others, I go ahead. Christianity, the hard work of actually becoming the Christian that God wants you to be is involved in the day-to-day conflicts and banalities and rituals of living with other people and working out those relationships in concrete ways.
Well, it's an impossible ideal in a sense, unless you're, nobody is a Christian in a sense, except for nobody's a Christian except for Christ in one sense. I mean, people are trying. Well, being a Christian means you're trying to imitate Christ. Is that?
No, see, and that's often a way that it's phrased. But again, just like with the hell conversation, mm-hmm. there's a reality to that none of us, at least in my tradition, none of us fully attain in this age the Christ likeness that we are destined for.
Okay, so your tradition would say that basically that's impossible.
Yeah, we are in this age. So the Bible talks about time and ages. Until I die, sin will always be with me. Mm-hmm. I will never fully overcome because I can't. A very Augustinian Calvinist tradition. I can't actually triumph over all my sin. I will always be hampered by it in this life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to be a realistic point of view in any case.
It's also a nice, people say, well, you're a sinner. I say, yeah, I know, I'm a Calvinist. To be a Calvinist says I am a sinner. And so when someone says, well, you're a dirty hypocrite, I say, absolutely. I'm a worse hypocrite than you've seen. Uh-huh. And I'm a worse sinner than you can possibly know, because this is where, because I'm always presenting a persona, but there's a shadow side to me that I'm hiding, that I'm even denying about myself. And this is why Christ always saves us, often despite ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I remember reading, there was a tradition of Buddhism when I was studying university where I guess the sage or whatever says, I'm the worst person or something. And that's his moment of enlightenment, realizing he is the devil in a sense, right? That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so then in my tradition, especially in terms of Calvinism, our rescue is something that Christ effects on our behalf. And all of what I do can only be, it's not a saving of myself, it's an expression of gratitude for that which has been accomplished for me. And how that's helpful practically is all my efforts at doing good works, at trying to help other people. One of the things you realize when you try to help other people is that people are really hard to help. Uh-huh. And we have all of our own mixed motivations. And so your friend comes to you and says, I'm afraid you're going to hell. Now, from his side of the wall, that's a loving thing to say to you.
Yeah.
But there are probably a bunch of other motivations inside of that person: pride, egotism, self-righteousness, that are also coming through in that message. So we're terribly mixed up people. That's what it means to be a human being.
That's true. That's true. Okay. So I'm just looking at my list of things I wanted to ask you. Again, I wanted to ask you about the Trinity, because I don't know if I've heard different theories about the Trinity, and I've heard people talk about the Trinity, and I know I've heard one Buddhist teacher say that there's something similar in Buddhism called the three kayas, which is the three bodies. And anyway, I kind of wanted to get your take on the Trinity, what the Trinity means. Are you able to is that too complex a subject to sort of say something about, or?
No. There's part of the question is how to get at it phenomenologically or historically. Mm-hmm. One of the important things to recognize is that, you begin with Abraham, and, Abraham was likely a polytheist like everyone else in his day. And he starts following this one God. Well, what's that relationship look like? Are there other gods? And one of the things, if you read the Old Testament carefully, is you'll notice that the Old Testament is a long conversation with polytheism. And you've basically got polytheists then kind of creeping into what's now today often called henotheists. Well, there's one God above all gods. And you'll find that language all throughout the Old Testament, and especially in the book of Psalms. there's one God above other gods, and then there's and this again is part of what Peterson talks about. So you have all of these different tribes with all of their different gods, and when the nations go to war, it's also God warfare. And so when, say, the Babylonians conquer, and so then Marduk becomes the supreme god over all the gods, and this is validated by the fact that Babylonian is just crushing these other nations. Well, what everyone in the world does, because they are consumers of their spiritual consumers, is that, well, I'm going to worship Marduk because he's clearly the top god. If you read,
you want the best god, no matter what.
You want the best god because you want, you want to be the wealthiest. You want to be a winner. Donald Trump.
Why would you drive a Volkswagen when you can have a Rolls Royce? Yeah.
Bingo. So, but what happens is that many of these nations, not just the Jews, also have this thing that their God is the top God. Yeah, but then their God gets exposed or owned by another nation. And so everyone just kind of gives up on their God because Baal isn't working and we're going to follow Marduk. Well, what happens with the Jews is, okay, so Babylon comes and Assyria comes and destroys the northern kingdom of Israel. Babylon comes and destroys the southern kingdom of Israel. And, well, what are the Jews supposed to think? We're going to give up on Yahweh and just worship Marduk. And a bunch of Jews do. But a group of Jews says, no. You know what really happened? The Lord punished us for our sins. And Peterson talks about this. This was our fault, what happened with the Babylonians. And what really is happening is that the Lord is the supreme God, and Marduk is either an under god or a fake god, and God, the Lord, will eventually triumph. And these Jews are so stubborn, they don't give up on this. And what happens is
that's why the Jews are still around and the Egyptians are not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what happens then is only one God, and that's the Lord. And so you've got the Jews thinking that. And then you've got Plato with his ideas of, and so what happens in Christianity is these ideas actually come together. But phenomenologically, so the Jews via exile, they basically, through this dynamic of loss and suffering, polytheism is beaten out of them. And by the time we get to Second Temple Judaism, about the time of Jesus, these Jews, when the Romans come in and the Greeks come in and they want to put up a statue in the temple, these Jews literally say, over my dead body. And they are going to wear out the arms of the oppressors, chopping their heads off. They're just going to, it's going to take so much work to kill all these people that these empires just give up and give in and say, these Jews are just so doggone stubborn. We're just tired of killing them. Okay, you can have your own thing over there, and we'll leave you alone. And that's where the Romans go. So then you've got monotheism. And then Jesus comes along, and Jesus starts saying things, and you read this in the Gospel of John, that I am. And the Jews rightly begin to say, what did you say? He's saying he's kind of saying he's part of God. He's kind of saying he's God's son. He's kind of saying he's the Lord. And
him and God are one. Is that what?
Yes.
Yes.
So a good Jew in hearing that would say, I'm going to take you out back and stone you. And they tried a few times. And Jesus, but then finally when Jesus goes down to Jerusalem, which his disciples say, don't go to Jerusalem, they're going to kill you. Well, they do kill him. And Jesus says, I'm going to walk right into this and I'm going to die. And then I'm going to be raised. Well, after he's raised, what are his disciples supposed to think about this? And so that really the most dramatic passages in the New Testament are things like in the Gospel of Matthew, after Jesus is raised, he presents himself before a crowd of about 500, and some worship and some doubt. Now we pay attention to the doubt. But when they say some worship, we say, whoa, stop. What are these people doing worshiping Jesus? because that was beaten out of them. Okay, are they going to go back to polytheism? No. And then so you've kind of got Jesus, God the Son and God the Father, and then in comes this Holy Spirit. And so what eventually comes out of that is, well, we're still monotheists, but and then Christianity works on this for about 400 years. They say, well, there are 3 persons and one God. And that's the orthodox formulation, that there's one essence or one substance, and this gets into the Greek terminology, but there's 3 persons. And 3
different manifestations of the one God principle.
See, if you say manifestations, you in a sense, and this is part of the difficulty of Trinity, is talking about it, because we're trying to appropriate it mentally. And this is why the church got very precise about language, because it said, if you try a metaphor like, here's a metaphor that's often tried, like water can be a solid, can be a liquid, can be a gas. Well, but it's still 2, those aren't 3 personalities. See, then we're bending the word personality. And so what the church said is there's 3 persons, which meaning you and I are 2 separate persons. So you can have that kind of dynamic and relationality, but there's one substance that are united in mission and purpose. And now suddenly, via this language, you look at a marriage, the 2 become one flesh. So marriage.
What is the ghost, and what is that? Is that consciousness? And what is the, and what is the Father? What is the Son? What does that mean?
Well, I think this is where Peterson and some of these categories are helpful, because the language, now we get into dogma. So the church establishes a dogma and says, here's a baseline, and this is going to govern us. Okay. But you can memorize a dogma, but now we need to connect it with the rest of our lives. All right. So here's the dogma: one substance, 3 persons. But now we've got the Holy Spirit. Well, what is the Holy Spirit? What does the Holy Spirit do? Well, the Holy Spirit is the way in which, so we've got the Father and the Son. Well, now you've got a relational situation that Jesus uses to describe our relationship with God, because, see, all of these things then are very useful tools for setting a relational universe and how to actually act towards one another. And
well, the thing I noticed about Peterson, compared to other kind of pandits, right? People who are just talking, and you can listen to people talk for hours. You can listen to Sam Harrison, absolutely brilliant and whatever. But there seems to be a kind of fire. And in my first essay on Peterson, I wrote, he's like possessed by a Holy Spirit, in the sense that there's something beyond him that is driving his mission. And, I'm not saying that that seems to be, that's transpersonal, or I don't know what the language to use is, but again, it's like the wave, not the person, and you can tell the difference between people who are animated by something beyond them that is very profound, and some people who are just very intelligent in this kind of mechanical sort of way. Does that make sense? And I've always when I hear the whole Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debate, well, maybe Sam Harris is animated by a Holy Spirit also, but he does. It seems so. Let's say there seems to be a missing dimension in just this purely analytical, rational way of looking at the world.
Well, and Greeks, the Greeks would have said, and Jung gets at, so this, ideas have us, we don't have ideas.
Yeah. Eros
or Cupid. Well, what happens? Well, when you fall in love, it seems like something comes in you and takes over, because, you meet someone who's just fallen in love, and you look at them, if you know them well, it's like, oh, they fell in love. I mean, because something is possessing them.
Yeah. Or in a
And
musical performance, I think of, you can hear when the spirit is there, and when somebody is just, the Rolling Stones are going out there and playing their song over and over again, the spirit's not there. It's just become this sort of mechanical repetition. Whereas
and
when real music is being created, I guess we could say that's the Holy Spirit, right? I mean,
well, and this is where dogma, because Christians
Christians don't like that.
Because this gets appropriated and it can be abused. So this surprises people, but people in the Christian tradition, conservative people will come up to me and say, well, Paul, the Holy Spirit told me that you have to do this. Then I listen to them. I think, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, and I'll wait till the Holy Spirit tells me that same thing. And so then you have this question of, so in the church, we're supposed to be governed by the Holy Spirit, but when is this the Spirit speaking?
Mm-hmm.
When is it not? I was so one of the churches I went to had a kind of a Pentecostal aspect to it. And one person in that church was trying to develop what was called the gift of interpretation. And so there's this practice called glossolalia that is very much practiced in Pentecostal churches of
speaking in tongues. Is that speaking in tongues? Yeah.
That's speaking in tongues. And so, this person was trying to develop, because the Apostle Paul writes about this, trying to develop the gift of interpretation. And what would happen every now and then in that church is someone would stand up and start speaking in tongues. And then basically the rule is, you're not going to do this in public unless someone is given the gift of interpreting the tongues, because that's what Paul writes about in the New Testament. And what happened in church is that we had a tile floor and someone dropped a collection plate, and this person stood up and gave the interpretation because he was confused and thought someone had been speaking in tongues. But what had happened is someone had dropped the collection plate. And so I was just watching this thinking, this is what it means to discern the Spirit. You just interpreted someone dropping the collection plate. Now, again, the cynic in me, and I've got a pretty strong cynic in me, kind of looks at this and says, is this all total BS? But the other side of me has to say, be careful about how cynical you are, because God can work through, and this is part of my openness. I look at Jordan Peterson, people say, regularly Christians will write to me and say, the Jordan Peterson is, and boom, 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 boom. We got different reasons from the left to dismiss him. And I'll say, but if you read your Bible carefully enough, if you know it enough, Cyrus is, Jonathan Peugeot calls him Cyrus. In the book of Isaiah, Cyrus is called the servant of the Lord. And the book of Isaiah uses that servant of the Lord. That is a very high title. And he's applying this to Cyrus, who is a pagan emperor who lives the kind of life that makes Donald Trump look like a putz. He literally has a harem, and, he can do whatever he wants to everyone. And Isaiah calls him the servant of the Lord. So if God can use Cyrus and Isaiah can call him the servant of the Lord, then who knows what God can do through Jordan Peterson. Well,
that reminds me of, I studied a lot of Eastern mysticism. It reminds me of the crazy wisdom masters in the East. That's very much a tradition, whereas somebody would appear to be a prostitute or a madman or just a total sex maniac, and actually this would be somebody very somebody it would be the Buddha, in a sense. So
that's, look at what Stormy Daniels is doing.
What's that?
Look at what Stormy Daniels is doing.
Stormy Daniels, who's that?
That's this porn star that Trump slept with, who has nothing to lose by telling everyone and, give back the $130,000 and, she just went to prison or something, or to jail recently, but she's the one that's causing Trump all of this trouble. Well, and that's kind of a figure like that. Well, I'm not saying Stormy Daniels is the servant of the Lord, but this is Peterson's point, one of his rules, which is dead on.
Maybe Donald Trump is a servant of the Lord, huh? Maybe.
You're going to get me into real. Well, I see now again, if I read Romans 13 and I would say, can America learn something from Donald Trump? Now, personally, I've voted Democrat all my life. I've got a lot of thoughts about Donald Trump, most of which I won't share publicly, but not a fan.
Yeah.
But at the same time, can God use Donald Trump to do good? Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I wouldn't put that in that terms because I'm not so much of a Christian as you are. But my feeling is that Donald Trump is an expression of some kind of truth emerging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a very ugly truth, right? It's hard to look at. I have a hard time sometimes looking at the guy, but he's something emerging from the depths to tell us something about ourselves, and maybe that is the shallowness of consumer society, or a world without spirituality, or without this connection to the divine, whatever you want to call it. Just pure materialism. It's like the pathology of pure materialism showing itself. And, it seems like the leftists can go one way and they just become hysterically anti-Trump. And then, or they can say, okay, listen, what is this telling us about, about ourselves? Like, again, the deeper thing of looking at your own inner Trump, or your own, your own, what part of you is like this man in some kind of way. That would be a difficult thing for many people to look at, just on a psychological, let's say, Petersonian level, right?
Well, I think Trump exposed the civil religion of the left. So here you have Obama, who is in his life a Puritan.
Yeah.
I mean, he's faithful to his family. He's self-controlled. Obama's a Puritan. But this gets into what David Brooks has been writing about for years, and Charles Murray, where the left practices Puritan values, at least the leftist elite practice Puritan values, but preach libertinism. Trump lives libertinism
and practices
preaches Puritanism, which is just laughable.
It's a strange inversion, huh?
Yeah, and so Trump is the mirror opposite of Obama.
Yeah, I thought of that as well. I thought of them being as two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Obama is squeaky clean. He's likable in every way almost. You just like the guy, and his family is beautiful. He's disciplined. He's intellectually clear. Yep. There's nothing to dislike about the person. And the only thing you could almost criticize him for is he's almost too perfect or something. Yeah. And then Trump seems to be this expression of ugliness, like the shadow of that. Yeah.
Oh, chaos and order.
Yeah.
And Obama is physically darker.
Yeah.
And look at Trump, white hair, white skin, but spray on tan. Yeah. I mean, it's you look at later, once people get a little bit of emotional distance and being able to start to analyze this, and of course Trump is pure chaos.
Yeah. And I don't want to get pure order. I don't want to get too political, but Obama was terrible on immigration, and Obama, some people say, I'm not a politically minded person particularly, but Obama dropped a lot of bombs on families, and so the actual, maybe if you look at the actual policies, what's the difference? Maybe there's not as big of a difference as people think. I'm not sure, right? Because I'm not a political pundit, so I wouldn't want to make a categorical statement in that way. But just looking at the psychology of America.
Yeah. No, it's crazy.
It's this. On one hand, there's this Puritanism, right? You're right, Obama, and on the other hand, there's this vulgarianism. There's this Baroque kind of. I don't know what it is, but.
Yeah. And Trump on his third marriage seems to be a serial womanizer from everything we know about him. Now, I grew up outside of New York City, so Trump was always in the news, and Trump. Yeah. We've known forever who Trump is, and he's who he is. He's
always just been there, right? He's been this sort of guy who's always been there. He's like. And
the piece that really caught my attention after Trump was elected, I'm trying to remember, it was Aaron Sorkin. He's a screenwriter, a very famous screenwriter, and he publishes this letter to his daughters after Trump is elected, and he's basically saying, this should never have happened. This will never happen again. Well, what's this? Well, what I call this is progressive liberationism. This is the civil religion on the left, where they imagine that this is the civil religion on the left, and it is a dogma that, and we're following this progressivism, and that has a lot of alignment with Sam Harris. And
exactly. I was just thinking of Sam Harris, and that's what I was writing about. I was writing about how the secular world, by rejecting religion, it kind of creates this quasi-religion.
It's not a quasi-religion, it is a religion.
Yeah, it is. It has all, they even start to say things like, you have to have faith in science, you have to believe in science, and they start developing institutions. And I know, Dawkins had a summer camp for children. It looks very much like, like American Christianity, right? Right. And then you talk to people about this, and they all have these formulaic answers and to your questions, and you're an idiot, and there's this angry atheist phenomenon, right? You're an idiot if you're just I knew the angry atheist sort of, it's this. Yeah, you're right. It is. There is something about, actually, humans make religions all the time, don't they? In any context, in any situation, they make religions over heavy metal music, rap music. They make religions over, everything, right? I think we're religious. Somehow we're religious. We're religious. Religion is how we collectivize our consciousness in some kind of a way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's how we make order of the world. It's how we create community. We are religious creatures, and we will always make religions. John Calvin says our hearts are idol, basically our idol factories, IDOL. I mean, we create idols all the time. We need gods in order to live. So we will make them, usually in our image or in the image of our desires, in order to manage life. That's what we do.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing to me about the church, right, is the church is sort of the original institution in some sense. I've been thinking about why the church is important, and it's something I've come to the conclusion that it's a small institution where there's still human intimacy available within that institution, whereas other institutions, when they get too big, people lose their humanity. Whereas within the church, there's the possibility of human interaction on an intimate level, which you don't get in larger institutions. Like, most churches are kind of small. Like your churches, there's big mega churches, I imagine, but they have their own pathology. But churches seem to retain this kind of human scale. Even large churches, they have small groups in them, because everybody understands you need that intimate community in order to actually practice the religion. You need to have conflict. You need to have, it's just like in a marriage. You need to both have the warmth of intimacy, and you need to have the conflict of human to human interaction. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. You would say conflict rather than the harmony of it, But yes, I mean, we kind of rub against each other, don't we? And then we become individuals.
And so, one of the points I made in the video last night that I've made in a number of my videos is, so right now in our contemporary framework, the expert, the people expert, is the psychologist, maybe the sociologist. How much? Here we're going to use science to understand people. Oh, okay. So, how old is the science of psychology? 100 years?
Yeah.
What church has been doing is studying people and developing institutions and playing with all of these frameworks, playing with our idolatries, playing with our metaphysics, playing with our community, playing with institutions. And we've been keeping a record of this for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And so it's, okay, well, you want to know about people and flourishing and well-being? Well, here's a huge body of data that is actually quite well documented to study people. Because but churches haven't approached it in a scientific manner. It's been much more organic. Yeah. And so this is, again, why You need
That's why
something.
Peterson's interesting again too, isn't it? Because he's bringing scientific perspective to religion, but not throwing religion out at the same time.
Well, I think Peterson is recognizing that we have been studying each other for far longer than we ever knew.
Yeah.
And religion is the product. It is the documentation of those studies. Now, it's in a different form than the kind of psychological studying he's doing. But so what he is doing is taking what he's learned from psychology and trying to read back over the tradition. Jonathan Haidt did exactly the same thing in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, or The Happiness, yeah, that's it. Jonathan Haidt's first book, which I think is better than his second book, more interesting for me, he says, there's wisdom in ancient religions, and he looks far beyond Christianity. He tends to be a little bit as culturally, the West has still got a...
But he's still an atheist, isn't he?
Yeah.
I was listening to the same thing with Eric Weinstein, who is a fascinating person, an amazing mind. What a guy. And he practices his Jewish religion, but he doesn't. He says he's an atheist. I find he still practices because he understands the need for it, but at the same time, so part of him is going and doing Jewish ritual, and then but at the same time in his another part of him he claims he's an atheist. So how can you be split in that kind of way? Either you're pregnant or you're not. I find it kind of strange. On the other hand, it makes it's kind of pragmatic sense, right? You understand that you need this, but maybe there's some honesty in atheism when people say, I just don't believe in God, and I just don't, right? I remember, Simone Weil, do you know the thinker Simone Weil?
Yeah.
She's a kind of Catholic mystic and a wonderful writer, and she was sort of a left-wing skeptic atheist. She was and then she had this very strong Christian experience. And she said she couldn't have been a Christian, an authentic Christian, right, if she hadn't been an atheist, So she said that her skepticism, her deep skepticism of the faith actually served her, and that a lot of people who claim to be, religious are just going through the motions, right?
We're human beings. We're full of lies. We're full of contradictions. So I'm a Christian minister. I would say the times in my life that it would have been expedient to give up my religion, it's in those times that I discovered how deep it was in me. But at other times when I'm comfortably, like I am right now, when I'm comfortably within my religion, I am free to experience all sorts of doubt. What if I have spent the last 55 years of my life serving what Sam Harris calls a damnable fiction?
Right.
Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe psychologically I don't want to face that, so I double down in my Christianity. That's not my experience. The only way I can actually talk to skeptics and people who are struggling with doubt but want to be Christians is if I myself understand that doubt from the inside out.
Right. So maybe this whole business of this, that's what's interesting about the dialogue between Harris and Peterson, because Peterson, when I first heard Sam Harris, I just completely dismissed him entirely. That would be my usual reaction to somebody with this, reductive materialist view. Just dismiss him, right? It would just be, I was like, this person is shallow or something. But then Peterson actually went and talked to this guy, and then I thought, okay, he's not shallow. It's he's very intelligent, and he's actually had spiritual experiences through his meditation, and so there's the fact that you can. That seems to me that's a much more generous attitude, maybe. Are you following what I'm saying? That I really thought it was that taught me something about how to deal with these angry atheist types.
Well, they're human beings.
Yeah, now I'm kind of putting them down. I'm making a caricature.
Well, and again, one of Peterson's best rules is, I'll rephrase it. In every conversation, talk to someone as if you have something to learn. That is, so people sometimes ask about the Freddie and Paul show, and I will tell them quite honestly, every time I am with Freddie, I learn something from him. And people will say, you learned something from Freddie? Yeah, I learned something from Freddie. And I find that regularly with, if I can tell my ego to go sit in the corner for a few minutes and sit down and actually listen, you can learn from anyone.
Not just anyone, you can also learn from your dog, you know. you can learn from, you know, whatever is manifesting around you, I think.
Absolutely.
You know,
and so what you do in that is, again, this is where I find my Calvinism helpful. How do I deal with my ego? Okay, I need to keep looking at myself and saying, you know, you're a sinful hypocrite. Now, you need to have a very strong ego to really be hard on yourself.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
People who have a fragile ego, you know, they need to keep trying to bolster themselves. Well, my parents were well put together people. You know, I felt very secure in their love. My poor wife sometimes looks at me and thinks, oh, the ego on this man. Yeah. People will say all kinds of horrible things to me. And does this mean I'm a narcissist, or, you know, which is it? But you need to be very secure to hate yourself in the right way. That's
interesting. I know that in the Buddhist circles I've been in, one of the critiques of Christianity is you always get is the Dalai Lama said this, that what's wrong with the Christians? They hate themselves so much. They're obsessed with their original sin, right? You know, yeah. You know, he came to North America, the Dalai Lama, and he saw people just, you know, wrecked, right, everywhere. They'd lost some kind of, you know, people, you know, but maybe that had more to do with materialism than you know, an original sin, or maybe it had to do with the corruption of Christianity. There's a fascinating person. Do you know Ivan Illich? Have you ever read his stuff? His thesis. This is his thesis. He was a Catholic, and he wrote books about school and medicine, about institutions.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't read any stuff.
His thesis was that all the sicknesses of modernity were related to the corruption of Christianity, in a sense, and he used this Latin phrase being that the corruption of the best is the worst, because he was a Christian, right? Huh. He wrote a book called Deschooling Society and Medical Nemesis. It was big in the 70s. Anyway, I thought that was.
I haven't read him.
That was an interesting, you know, that actually, you know, Christianity has a shadow side, but it also has this very sublime side, right? Like all, I mean.
So why are you obsessed with Peterson?
Why am I obsessed with Peterson? Again, well, when I was young, I guess I read Crime and Punishment about 3 times. I read all of Nietzsche. I read everything of Dostoevsky, and I read Northrop Frye. I was into Blake. I'd read all of George Orwell. It's just amazing how the same books on his book list were the books I read. I read The Rape of Nanking. I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. All these. So and then, you know, at a certain point, let's say, I guess at age 16 or 17, I was. You know, just an ordinary atheist. I had no belief. I had a very negative idea of Christianity, progressivist, age 16 or 17. And then I read Carl Jung, and I read his biography, and that just blew my head right off. You know, that just showed me an entirely different world. Yeah. And then I started to read about Eastern religion, and I started to read about Zen, and and when I moved to Montreal, I had some difficult times. I did psychedelics. I got very lost, you know, but I was studying at McGill, same place that Peterson was. I imagine we were there at the same time. He was, you know, I was younger, and then I got very into Buddhism for years and did a lot of, you know, Zen practice, but, you know, my roots and stuff were in the same books that Peterson read. And so when I started to see videos come up about him, I immediately liked him, and I thought, I can understand this. This is great, and this is the kind of Christianity I think I have to work through my negativity towards Christianity. My mom took me around to all these churches when I was younger, and I felt nothing, right? Whereas I fell right into Buddhism. I thought I wanted to meditate, because meditating was very concrete. It's not a bunch of dogmas. I sat in Zen meditation, for 40 days, watching my own state of mind, and so this was very concrete. It was a practice. Meditation was a practice. My view has changed a lot since then, because I don't think of Buddhism as I don't think that, let's say, Buddhism is this enlightened religion and Christianity is this dark religion. And, I guess I was a Buddhist fundamentalist for a while, because that's what happens. I think everybody goes through a fundamentalist period in their religion, right? They believe that this is the one true thing. And so again, I guess years of practicing meditation, studying Buddhism, and then coming back to Peterson, it was like, in one sense, it was like a regression, because I've already read those books. And then I found this. On the other hand, it was going to back to my origins of, how I thought about things. And so and also I'm kind of an obsessive person like you, I think. And whenever I've sort of found something I liked, I like a thinker or a teacher, or when I was 18, I read everything Henry Miller read, and then I had to read all the people that Henry Miller said to read, and I had to read all the people that were in Henry Miller's community, and then I had to read every obscure thing that Henry Miller ever read. I had to absorb everything of Henry Miller, and I don't read Henry Miller that much these days. I occasionally go back as for nostalgic sake, but I guess I'm going through the same process with Peterson, and I think it's like a kind of possession in a sense of a thinker, and trying to work through it. And it's not that I think that Peterson is the ultimate thinker, or there's other thinkers I even put higher than him, but the fact that he's I guess so big in the world, in reality, is quite something to me. The fact that his message is having so much actual effect in the world, because I've met people, I would say, deeper and wiser than Peterson, but they're completely unknown. Nobody will ever know who they are. I've met people like that, and
absolutely,
they've had as much influence on me as Peterson, but I couldn't talk about them.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Nobody else would know who you're talking
They
about.
wouldn't want me to talk about them, because they probably have no interest in fame and fortune and becoming a star, and I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah.
No,
that's true.
So Peterson is easy. He's like opened up this whole possibility of discussing a lot of things that have been that I've been thinking about and feeling and going through to an audience, it's a strange thing, right? So
that's exactly my experience too.
It's gotten me out of my let's say isolation, or hermetic isolation, or hermetic, is that the right word? Being hermit, yeah. My isolation, and I think that a lot of these things that I was thinking, nobody else was thinking around me, and I'm holding all these things inside of myself, and if I look around me, there's a few people here and there, but this is this massive, and I went to David Fuller's men's group and met all these people, and it's just sort of opened me up to a larger community, in a sense.
So you got to know David via, well, you're in Paris and he's in.
Yeah, we're not so far from each other, and he put out a couple of my articles on his Medium site, and then he invited me to his men's group in London, and so I've published articles for him, and
well, and this is a classic. Part of the reason I think this is a men's thing going on with Peterson is there's this great point in C.S. Lewis's life when he's young and he meets this guy down the road, Arthur Greaves, and they discover they're both into Norse mythology.
Uh-huh.
And it's sometimes said that men have friendships side by side, focusing on a third thing. And I think what Peterson has done is there's the right mix right now of timeliness on a whole bunch of levels. But what you just described has been my experience and the experience of many others who I've talked to. You know, people come to my meetup because here we can talk about these things, and somehow there was a lot of subjects that Peterson talks about that were taboo in the culture. You just couldn't talk about such things. Yeah.
You just had to be careful of what you say, right?
Yeah.
Somehow you had, or there was something, you know, he's just opened up this entire palette, I guess, of information.
You know, and so, you know, I just did a conversation with James Rosy this week on my channel, and I'd met James a little bit, but you know, some of the people who go to my meetup, I mean, they're just as driven as you and I on this stuff, and some of them are already kind of post Peterson, but what he did was at least initiate the chance to develop a forum to have a lot of these conversations. And so that's really what's happening in my meetup, and we'll have to see how long it goes, but it's opened up relationships and friendships, and Peterson was kind of the spark to get some of these conversations going, but men are finding each other in this, and a few women too.
Yeah, a few women too, but I guess it's largely men who are, you know, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's just very interesting. I mean, and I think you and I are. I mean, because you wrote me, you're like, you seem to be another person that's as obsessed by this as I am, and I think there's.
Yeah, well, I think you've put out the most content on YouTube, right? But I think I've put out the most content on Medium in terms of just. I'm not saying quality. I mean, I mean, for my own part, yeah, a lot of the stuff you do is quality, but in terms of just amount, right? I think I put out an article a week for. You know, it keeps going on. And actually the moment when Fuller contacted me and I wrote this article on Jung, which went kind of, well, for me, viral. That was, I said, okay, I'm tired of this Peterson thing. I got to move on to something different. And you know, and that was the moment where I started to even take off even more. So,
well, and I hear a lot of people. I mean, like James, he had mentioned, we went to the event in Sacramento when Peterson was here, and like he said and when I talked to him, he said, I went to that event saying, I'm going to kiss Peterson goodbye.
Yeah.
By going to this, and he brought his wife, and I didn't kiss him goodbye at all, and.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, once you've listened, like it's a different way of absorbing a thinker, right? Because in the past, you would just read a book, right? If you had Nietzsche around, you just read all of Nietzsche's books, but you never listen to him talk or have dialogue with people. You know, so you get the body of work, right? You get maps of meaning, and then the body of work just is, and then you can continually go over the body of work over and over and over and over again and refine the body of work till you understand more and more and more and more and more about it. So you become this expert on this one thinker in a sense, right? And then once you've learned, I guess, the basic Petersonian vocabulary, right? You've got his basic axioms. Then you think, okay, I've got it. You know, I can go on to somebody else. But then some other. It's. I think you said a very profound thing, which made me think a lot. You said that it's like watching this TV show. What was it?
Truman Show.
What?
The Truman Show.
No. It was. You say it was like a serial TV show.
The Office.
The Office. It's like you get hooked to the drama as well as the ideas. So it's not just the ideas, which are great, you know, and but there's almost a dramatic movement to the whole thing, which you're following in real time, and
yes.
It seems to be it really is this kind of Gutenberg revolution with the YouTube and stuff, and then there's commentaries and meta commentaries of meta commentaries, and it goes on and on and on and on, and just it kind of blows me away how much information you can absorb, like how much you can learn, and I mean, I guess another great thinker will come on the scene in a few years, and then the same thing will happen. And maybe this will be how we absorb ideas in the future.
Well, and I told Peterson, every time I've talked to him, I've thanked him, and then I think, well, what am I thanking him for? He has kind of been the facilitation for me to learn. I mean, the thing with Peterson is things go out in so many different directions from him. So I knew nothing of Jung. I knew very little of Nietzsche. I knew something of Dostoevsky. I knew almost nothing of Solzhenitsyn. So my situation is the reverse. That you did all this work beforehand, but I've spent my life learning the Bible, ideas of what inspiration means, mythology, classical culture. And so this
now I'm reading Jonathan Pageau's book about symbolism in Genesis. Did you read that yet?
I read some of his brothers.
His brother, excuse me, it's I got it right here. It's Matthew, The Language of Creation. Beautiful book, actually. And so I guess I'm learning. I guess I'm going in a Christian direction. I'm learning about Christianity. I'm learning about the Bible. And
if you
actually that started a little bit before Peterson. There was this Jewish rabbi who I've developed this friendship with, and that was quite rich.
And there's just so much, it's just kind of taken my learning. And then the YouTube thing for me, I mean, there are brilliant people out there that write me emails almost every day. Think about this, think about this, think about this. It's like, and I just, for me, it just.
How do you manage it? I mean.
Yesterday I kind of blew a fuse in that I had so many church things coming at me, and my wife is like, well, we got to work on these things on the house, and I've got my Sunday deadline, and I'm cleaning out my office, and it was like but I can't help myself, and maybe I need a 12-step program.
You can't help yourself. Maybe
because everyone else around me is like, are you still talking about this? What is with you? But it's like, well, it's just me. Don't worry about it. I'll be all right. But
great.
There seems to be a number of people out there that
we've got Peter Sonitis. That was the article by what's his name, Jonathan Rosy. Peter Sonitis. It's an actual condition. I think it's a condition.
Yeah.
He wrote about it in a negative way, but it's a pretty good term, Peter Sonitis. I don't think it's necessarily. You wrote that to me in the tweet. It's not necessarily a disease.
No. So where's this going to go for you? I mean, so you're playing with podcasting and you're writing. I mean, are you making a living as a writer? Or?
No, I'm a teacher. Well, I teach. I'm a supply teacher at different universities in Paris.
Okay.
And that's how I earn my living. Which I guess gives me a bit more free time than most because I have school holidays and I also have long commutes. So I'm in the train writing. So that's, I became a writer because of trains, basic commutes. I had nothing to do and I didn't want to waste my time. So I started, before that I was a songwriter. I wrote hundreds of songs. I put out a couple of albums on a label in France. Most of my interest was music, and I wrote a book I published a book of poetry this year. So it was more on the creative side, than the let's say analytical or I've had to, I guess what this whole process for me is teaching me how to think in a more analytical way than I'm normally accustomed to doing. Learning how to write and learning how to phrase each word and get each thing to mean exactly how what I want to say. And so Peterson helped me with that. He says you need to well, I guess I was I guess I was doing what Peterson was saying to do, like write about your life. And I was doing, that's been my process, like for until now. I was almost doing that spontaneously, and then he sort of made it more conscious of what I'm actually doing. If that makes any sense?
It makes perfect sense. And you telling your story is part of the reason I couldn't bear to not believe in the resurrection and the life of the age to come. Because when I imagine, when I, in a sense, through that little bit of a story you just told me, I can imaginatively kind of enter into your life, and I think about, okay, who you are this, no, you and I, we're not very high up on any particular large hierarchy. I've got a few thousand people that listen to my YouTubes. You get a few thousand people that read your writing, and we've all got this Peterson obsession right now, and we're doing this. But, you and how many other people out there are, in Christian terminology, you're made in the image of God. And in Tolkien terms, you are a sub-creator. You're taking the glory that God has seeded into all of creation, and you are working it. You are working the cultural mandate, and you are doing this. And as you're writing songs, as you're writing pieces, as you're taking the glory that's out in the world and you're refining it and you're making more glory out of it. And I think all of this is just going to die and be eaten by worms. And I think, no, your story is going to continue, because you have a sense right now that, don't you almost always have a sense that, well, I'm writing stuff now, but someday I'm going to write better stuff.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Someday I'm going to nail this glory. And someday I'm really going to hit this. And it's just further on and further in. And so when I think about this, and there are millions and millions and millions of people out there like you, billions, in fact, throughout human history. And to think, when I think about the way that, let's say, Sam Harris's worldview looks at this, think, oh, what a glorious thing, and then it's all just going to die. I can't live in a world like that. And I can't live in a world where...
It's such a poverty-stricken view. It's such a,
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading Matthew Pageau's book, and it's about symbolism, and everything. He's saying that, I guess symbols and religious view is about meaning, right? About everything having some kind of meaning, right? In a symbolic worldview, everything has a meaning. So time and space and all of these things that we think of in materialistic terms are much deeper than just time, and just like the minutes passing by. That's not what time means. Time means transformation, and space means the container of everything, or all these things have this deeper meaning, and the more you can align yourself with that, this deeper meaning, the more the more life becomes just with all of its suffering, I guess,
and even the suffering, everything in this world is pointing to something bigger, deeper, truer, more glorious than we are experiencing right now.
Yeah.
That's a sacramental view of the world. And the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic are a little bit, Protestants have issues with this because, I won't get into that, but this is the worldview. And so now if you apply that to yourself, see, I would say that you have been made for a glory that you are only now partaking. And the participation in that glory will be as an individual. And so you will one day, see, in your perfected, glorified state through Christ, you will one day write the kinds of pieces that now you can only look upon and admire. And in that day, you will look at them and say, I've got another gear. And I think one of the best representations of this is C.S. Lewis's last Narnia chronicle called The Last Battle.
Yeah, I read that to my daughter last year. The whole series. Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, I don't know the rest of C.S. Lewis's work, actually. I only know Narnia.
You should read, especially someone with, you should read Till We Have Faces.
Till We Have Faces. Oh, I got to write that down.
He retells an ancient Greek myth, but I think that's probably his best work of fiction.
Till We Have Faces.
Till We Have Faces.
Okay, I just wrote that down. Yeah, okay.
because he asked the question, why are holy places dark places?
Why are holy places dark places? Okay.
Yes. Why are holy places dark places? And the question is, why can't we see the face of God? Is the problem on our side or his side? And it's an immensely profound book.
Maybe it's on God's side. No, I'm joking.
We certainly want that to be.
Well, I'm referring to a kind of heretical view that I learned that, or it would be heretical to a lot of the view that some Jewish mystics have is that God needs your help, right? Your job is to heal God, not the other. God is schizophrenic. God is crazy. Like in the Old Testament, he does all these bad things to you and stuff. And your job is to heal God. I thought that was a interesting theological position, which probably wouldn't fly with most Christians. But
that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
But I can't. I mean, the Christian story has gotten so deeply into me. The joy of the vision of the potential for perfection drives it. It's like gravity. It pulls me towards it, and I bring around me, the other people that get clumped to me. I at least in my mind, I bring them towards that. I want to see Freddie perfected, because now I can see, even with all of Freddie's struggles, now I can see just in tiny glimmers of the perfection that he will become when he's no longer bound. There's Kurt Vonnegut's Bergeron. What's his? It's a famous short story. It's about equity, where everyone is, the very strong are given weights to make them less strong, and those with perfect eyes are given glasses to not see so well, and those with really good brains are given drugs to impede, so that nobody is smarter than anybody else, nobody is more beautiful than anyone else. You got to read that short story by Kurt Vonnegut. And here's the irony of that story, is that one of the guys, Bergeron, why can't I think of his first name? His last name is Bergeron. He basically liberates himself because he is the strongest, smartest, best-looking man in the world. But here's the irony, that all the weights that culture had put on him have just made him stronger. And so here's the thing. The question is, will Andrew Sweeny someday be liberated from all of the encumbrances, and what kind of writer will you be? What kind of songwriter will you be? What kind of person in relationship will you be? What kind of seeker of truth will you be? That vision, because that is the age to come. That is what I believe we are heading for. And C.S. Lewis says at every given moment, and Peterson says this almost exactly in a conversation on the Rubin Report with him and Ben Shapiro. Peterson, this basically just very similar to C.S. Lewis when he said, at any given moment, we are either turning towards that future or turning away from it.
Yeah.
And in every decision we make, we're making that. And C.S. Lewis says, in any given moment, we're either taking steps towards that creature, the likes of which at this point we would be tempted to worship, or that creature, the likes of which we would be terrified and disgusted by. And that's the drama we're living.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I've heard that called the self-contraction. Like you contract in on yourself, or you're open to, I guess, what you would call divinity, or what could be called divinity, or you either contract and remain small and neurotic, and and we do that all the time, right?
And so now, you asked about heaven and hell. Yeah. Well, heaven is in a sense, so if you want to read, if you're curious about the heaven and hell thing, read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, because this is a book where he has a drama of, I hate the ending of it, but he has a drama of, this is what is hell is, you're first surprised that this is hell because it's a place where anything you want, you can have just by thinking of it. You think, well, that must be heaven. Anything I want, I can have just by, boom, just like I Dream of Jeannie, bang, there it is. That's that. What do you mean that's hell? That sounds like heaven. But here's the thing that happens in that space. The one thing you can't do is get along with anyone else.
Yeah.
So it's this place filled with endless miles of palaces, but nobody can stand to have a next door neighbor.
Uh-huh.
Because, well, what is that? Well, what if I have...
But there's so many kinds of hells. I was thinking of the hell that I've heard about that disturbed me the most was in a Leonard Cohen song. Do you know Leonard Cohen?
Yeah.
It was something like each person that you hurt, that hurt never heals, or something like that. Like the people that you've hurt, that they never heal. And that seemed to me a really terrible hell.
Yeah.
It's hurting other people and not being able to atone for it, or.
So then when you get into the other country, the ghost, it's basically a bus that goes from hell to heaven.
Yeah.
And they get off the bus, they quarrel all the way there, and they get off the bus and they hate the place.
Yeah.
The grass hurts my feet. The river's too loud. There's all these annoying beings of light that are coming around me. Why don't they leave me alone? And so then most people get on the bus and go back to hell.
Uh-huh. They don't recognize heaven, you mean? That's what that.
Oh, they don't want it.
Uh-huh.
They want what they want. And so in a sense, what this is that what hell is a human being finally turned in on themselves. A grumbling person becomes only a grumble. The person itself that grumbles disappears and gives way to the grumble. Uh-huh. Whereas the person in heaven finally becomes completely selfless and can in fact enjoy and participate in all of the glory because they are no longer a prisoner of their own ego. And in that sense, they can actually have relationship and they can actually see God. Because the reason we can't see God is that God would crush us, not because of this is what he's trying to do, but because of the girl who grows up in the small town is always celebrated for her beauty, goes to New York City and realizes that there are women far more beautiful than she is and more smart and more talented. And so she wants to go back to the small town where she can be the big deal.
Uh-huh. That reminds me of the frog in the well story. Do you know that one?
No.
Well, the frog, he lives in a well, and then one of the other frogs goes out of the well and visits the ocean, comes back and says, hey, there's this huge, vast, infinite thing. You got to check this out. And the other frog says, no way, I'm leaving this, my comfortable well with its slimy walls and television and beer and whatever. I guess if it's frog, it would be more like snails and flies. And so, and then finally he convinces him to go out and see the ocean. And he sees the ocean and he explodes or something because it's beyond his it's too terrifying for him. And he hasn't, anyway.
So hell finally, as C.S. Lewis says, we've always been telling God, my will be done. And hell is God saying, okay. You can have everything you want, but your wants, and C.S. Lewis says, we are like children making mud pies in the backyard because we have no idea what a day at the beach is like.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that reminds me of C.S. Lewis in the Narnia story, talking about dreams. He talks about, you want your dream to come true. He said, do you really want your dreams to come true? Like, look at your dreams, like that. Do you really want things to come true?
Yeah.
Because if you really look at your dreams,
So you live in Paris and you're teaching.
I live just outside of Paris. I live in Versailles, next to the palace. And I'm a supply teacher of English in 4 different universities.
Okay.
And I'm married and have a little daughter, and
Wonderful.
play guitar sometimes and do this thing.
Did you marry a French woman, or is your wife?
My first wife was French. I had a very short and dramatic and first marriage, and I'm remarried, and my wife's actually Polish now. So we're both immigrants. Would that be the right word? We're both non-French expatriates. Right. Yeah, we're both.
And you imagine living in France? Do you enjoy living in France?
Well, yeah, I think there's like a 10-year rule. I don't know if you've heard that. After you've been here for 10 years, you can't go home. I've passed the 10-year point, and so it's my home now. I can't imagine going back to Canada, but
what's your sense of
going back at one point, because earning a living here it's like not like I'm living in luxury or anything, but we thought of moving back to Canada, but we just decided to stay.
And your take on the relationship between the French and Muslim immigrants?
I don't know if I could give an informed opinion about that. Or if I could
have much contact with.
I could say anything profound about that, really, because I don't have too much contact with immigrant community, so I don't think I could say much. I think there's a lot of goodwill, that doesn't get written about in the news. You have this sort of hyperbolic stories which always come out that make it sound like there's this terrible there are certainly terrible suburbs but I guess the population here is very deep in the French society, Muslim population. So, but anyway, I don't have too much intelligence to say about that.
So how's the Jordan Peterson thing going to end?
How's it going to end?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I was trying to write a book, and I had this book in my mind, but the book keeps getting bigger and bigger and more fragmented and more out of control. So it's almost like it's too big now to be a book, and it's got too many different parts. It's got too many different arms and legs, and so I thought about writing a book about him. I don't know. Who knows? I couldn't answer that. What about you?
Well, has Peterson peaked?
Has Peterson peaked? I think his presence is going to be pretty stable now. I think the dramatic part of his expression is probably the war is over in a sense. But I think he's too popular to go away, so he's not going to go away. I mean, he's not like a flash in the pan, he's not like he's going to be around,
Is he going to be, he often talks about making a misstep and getting taken out. I don't believe that. I think what would take him out would be if he, say, fell into a funk and disappeared for a year. That might improve his mystique. I don't know.
Well, I often thought that there was a while where I thought he was repeating himself too much, and I thought that he's becoming like the Rolling Stones and just saying the same thing over and over again, doing the same song. Yeah. But talking about the postmodernism and all that, and I got kind of bored of that. I thought, he's repeating himself too much, and my feeling was that it would be great if he went off for a year and thought more and then wrote some more source material.
I think that's a function. I think part of that repetition is a function. Well, it's a function of a couple things. Number one, that's what there's a big audience that wants to hear him talk about. But the true fans, in my opinion, most of the true fans are waiting for the biblical series to start.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I'm interested. That's what I want to hear. Yeah, that will get me excited. The Sam Harris. Sam Harris stuff got me pretty excited. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
And I felt a lull before that. There was not much going on. The 12 rules of life stuff, I've heard it all. And then Sam Harris stuff. Okay, well, there's, that's pretty interesting. And then, the next stage, that would get me, very hooked. I think hearing more.
Why is that? Because here's the funny
because
thing.
all these stories are so important, and they're almost subliminal. They're almost subconscious. They're part of our minds. They're part of our collective unconsciousness in such a powerful way. Whether we're atheists or Christians or Buddhists, or they're all there. So he's bringing them to the surface, and that just sets you on fire. I think. I mean, doesn't it? You would know that.
Yeah, it does me, but it should me because I'm a Christian minister.
What?
And I understand that. I mean, the only reason you can keep preaching for 40 years every week is because you're writing something else. And as a Christian minister, you very quickly learn, if I am preaching fundamentally from what's inside of me, it's a very small well.
Yeah.
But if I can preach what's inside of, this is where Sam Harris is all wet. If I can preach what's inside of the canon, the text, if I can go down and bring things up from the Bible, that's inexhaustible in a lifetime. You can't exhaust that. And so what's interesting to me is that all of these people who are not Christians are like, I'm waiting for the biblical series. And it's like, that's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Especially because, again, there is thousands and thousands and thousands of Christian ministers who are out there talking about this stuff every week to half-empty rooms, at least in the West, not so much in the East and the South. But what is Peterson doing? Why is he, what is with this?
Well, I think I said it right in my first essay on him. He's on fire with the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say for a non-Christian, perhaps, and I don't know, but
no, it's not ridiculous.
But that's what it is. I mean, and I know that when my mom drove me around to all these churches, I didn't mean people like that. It's like, okay, it's like this. It's like, okay, if I had met Saint Francis, I'm not saying that Peterson's Saint Francis, but if I had met Saint Francis, I would have become a Christian. But I met other people, so I kind of became a Buddhist because those other people were on fire with the Holy Spirit in a Buddhist way. So that was something that was alive, And when I was younger and I went around to all these Christian churches, I didn't feel something that was alive. This feels very alive.
So here's the question. He starts up in Exodus, and it doesn't have the sizzle of Genesis. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, and okay, so he's starting up on Exodus. Is he just going to do this in the Bader Theater in Toronto?
No, it's not going to. It's not going to happen because he's too smart and he has too much integrity and I don't think that will. I think, and he has too much intelligence. There's always intelligence coming out of Peterson. So if the intelligence. And it's not just a dry intelligence. When I say intelligence, I'm not talking about merely intellectual intelligence, right? It's another kind of intelligence. And I think that's inexhaustible. As you say, I think it's inexhaustible. And maybe it's because he's relying on, or not maybe, it's because he's relying on these ancient, text, right? These archetypes.
Well, I'm not convinced. I'm obsessed, but I'm not convinced. I'm waiting to see because it's.
You think that he's going to fall flat? You think
it could happen? That stuff happens. People explode on the scene, and then it goes away. And well, C.S. Lewis did. Everyone in the 40s, after World War II, after he'd done the radio series, C.S. Lewis. Everyone imagined C.S. Lewis had peaked.
Yeah.
And now, most of C.S. Lewis's exponential popularity happened after his death, which I think was an answer to prayer for Lewis because he never wanted to be famous.
Well, I'm a songwriter, so I follow singers, and I saw Bob Dylan recently in Paris. And in one sense, the show was terrible. In one way, on another sense, it was still Bob Dylan. Even he was doing Frank Sinatra songs. It's like he was the most un-Bob Dylan of Bob Dylan he could possibly be. And for me, being a Bob Dylan fan, it was still fascinating and rich. So it doesn't matter. Like if somebody is maybe if he's peaked in terms of, I don't think he's peaked, but I think he's maybe he's had a first peak. Maybe there'll be another peak.
Yeah, well, you don't know.
But no matter what he does, it will be interesting. That's the thing. And same thing with Leonard Cohen. Like he put out this album in the 80s, and they didn't even release it in America, and it had the song Hallelujah on it, right? And that song became a hit in the 2000s and the 90s, and it turned out to be his biggest song ever. So he was washed out and done as far as the world was concerned. But there was all through his entire career, because he was a lifetime artist, there was quality being done. It's just that the society couldn't see it. So in a way, it doesn't matter what people think. It's really. I think he's a real thinker, a thinker and communer. And I think that whatever he does will be interesting. It may or may not be popular. I don't think he'll be like Elvis, or I don't think he'll be like some. I don't think he'll be able to live with himself if he's just putting out something that's dead night after night. It's funny that I think about this in terms. I think he'd probably just have a heart attack and fall over if that was happening, because he couldn't. I think he has so much, let's say, fire inside of him. He won't tolerate that in himself.
I think that's exactly
you were talking about that yourself. You were saying that I have enough. What were you saying? That I have enough. I have enough ego to be self-hating, or I'm saying that. I'm not paraphrasing that right, but
I think Dylan's a great example, because Dylan, the moment in which Dylan rose and became enormous.
Yeah.
Well, there was the mixture of the personality and the moment.
Yeah.
And as you and I have already said, there are many, many, many brilliant people out there, as brilliant as Peterson, as insightful, just in different ways, so on and so forth, that none of us will ever know, because it's not the moment, or they don't care to be public, or for whatever.
And I know songwriters that are more deeper than Bob Dylan, but they never became the thing, right? They never became the voice of their generation or any of that sort of nonsense, right?
So Peterson, Peterson has been riding this wave. He hit this wave, and I think what you said about him is exactly right, because on his book tour, so when he was in Sacramento, I've been watching him, because there's enough preachers and Peterson, there's a lot in common going on with him. And
he's a holy roller for sure. I mean, he is. That's what he is.
He's an evangelist.
He's an evangelist. He's a holy roller. He's a preacher in every sense, but the formal sense. That's what he's doing. That's what I mean by he's on fire with the Holy Spirit. Because if you're just giving a speech, it's like, very interesting. And that's what most people, most of the public intellectuals, they're out there and they're just giving speeches, and that's that's compelling or not, but it's not being a holy roller,
Yeah. Well, so he's on his book tour, he's transformed it, where he gets up night after night and he basically shares his thoughts to 3,000 adoring people. That's what he's doing on this book tour. It's not a book tour. Mm-hmm. It's an evangelistic crusade. It's Billy Graham without the organization behind him, and this is what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so he's gonna do some in Europe. He's gonna keep doing this. The question is, where does this go? Now then he's gonna do the biblical series. Well, is he gonna integrate the book tour in the biblical series? I think that would be a smart idea. But the question is going to be, will he, like many preachers, start repeating himself?
Yeah.
And so
actually that was the sense that David Fuller got in the London show. She said, he didn't like it. He thought it was kind of like, I heard all this before. It was like a greatest hits concert. And so he wrote this big piece, about how Peterson had sort of, he was losing it in some sense. And I thought, oh no, he's just having a weeknight, or,
could be.
And maybe he is repeating himself, and maybe he ran out of his usual tropes. But I doubt that I doubt that would, I don't find, see, if you really love, let's say, a thinker or an artist, you're interested by their lesser works as much as you're interested by, you know, their greatest hits, you know, and you just, cause you have some kind of dedication to that person. So for me, it's like, okay, he'll fail. He might fail a few times, and then something else will appear that is interesting.
Well, I completely agree, but so there are various questions of this. What will be his lasting impact? Obviously, at this point, we have zero idea, because Augustine. Think about Augustine. Augustine is this individual who has the impact of Augustine on human history is hard to contemplate. Same with someone like Martin Luther, and obviously someone like Jesus Christ and Gautama and Muhammad and Nietzsche. I mean, so you've got all these individuals that have shaped history, and at this point in time, we have zero idea that, you know, what his lasting legacy will be. But it's still my son. So I've got a son who comes to my meetup sometimes, and he says to me, the most boring question is, where is this Peterson thing going? That's what he says to me. I'm like, no, that's the most interesting question. And I don't know, because maybe it's a personality thing. Maybe I'm, you know, projecting onto him, but I'm watching him very carefully, and I'm asking, okay, what's his next move? Part of this, because maybe it's my own ambition, desiring to be more effective, because I'm saying, why are people listening to him and not listening to me? So is it that I am seeing things wrong? Is it because I'm doing it wrong? Is it because I don't understand the world? Is it, you know, why is it? So what's then the synergy between Peterson and the wave? And what does that tell us about our environment? So that's an aspect of it that fascinates me, and I'm just always working on it. So, yeah, maybe it's just me. Well, we've been doing this for 2 hours, and I don't have a sermon yet for Sunday.
That was pretty great. Yeah, I mean, pretty long. That's the longest one I've done so far. Again, it's a whole new game for me. So,
well, I don't know what to think of YouTube. Every time, you know, so often after I finish doing a video, it's like, do I just hit delete and go on with my life, or do I hit post and go on with my life? And part of that is ego, because if I hit post and nobody cares about it, what does that say about me? And at some point,
you're a big loser. Yeah. No, but I would like to post this. I think there were moments which I thought were very, very interesting that people will find interesting. And
I think that
it might even be that it's like, it might even be worth cutting up certain parts. But you know, for me, that's too much. Like, but
the value for me of posting it is, and this is the same with, we don't know what we've said today that might be valuable.
Yeah.
That we might only know that it was valuable days, months, or years from now. And it'll stick in my mind somewhere. And at some point I'll say, Andrew said something. And then it's like, well, how can I find that? Oh, well, not only did we record it, well, then I got to manage my recording, but we posted it. So now I can go back and find this and do my obsessive compulsive thing and find exactly that moment. And what I'll learn is that it wasn't exactly like I remember it, but if I expand it a little bit, I'll learn more. And that's why I blog. That's why I record. That's why I YouTube. That's why I do everything, because I don't know what is true or valuable in this moment.
There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. But, you know, we've gone on a somewhat of a conversational journey together, yes, and which may or may not be compelling to some people. And it might be compelling to one person. That's enough.
That's exactly it. Might
if that one person took it and made it into, you know, paper bird. I don't know what that was just the image that came to my head.
If
Made
they
it something beautiful, then it's worthwhile, no?
if they refined the glory out of it, because
Because there's a lot of digression and blah blah blah, and then there's a few moments of yes, and then it's like a on a boat.
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation.
This is what we and again, I'm just I am just so blown away by so Jordan Peterson brought you and I together. You and I never would have met without Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I never would have just called up a Calvinist minister, gone through the phone book and said, "Oh, I got to talk to a Calvinist minister." No, it wouldn't be the first person I would have, but I've enjoyed your stuff. So
yeah, and keep writing because I think you're. Obviously, it's because of the obsession. You know Peterson better than most, so you're actually an expert now. You've put in the time. You've become an expert on Jordan Peterson. It doesn't mean that there won't be others out there who will see something or write something or do something. But
shouldn't I get like a master's degree for that or something, or like a?
Should you be paid handsomely for this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway,
but
I time and energy. No, you do it for free, right? And then
that's exactly right. You do it. You're doing it because you have to do it. And in Christian theology, this is called a calling.
Yeah,
God has called you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we would say as Christians.
Yeah,
this gets into God 1, God 2, and what is God, and so. But no, keep working your calling. And a psychologist would say, well, you're working out. No, okay, that too. It's not one or the other. It's that too.
Well, the other thing is I'm an addictive personality and I can't help it. And I'm not, at least I'm not, drinking.
Exactly right. I had a good friend who was an alcoholic. And
I like alcohol, but
he passed away. And here's the thing. He was an alcoholic and he was a music lover. And so he had 14,000 albums and another 20,000 cassettes and CDs in his house when he died. This poor widow. And then, so she's trying to clean out the house. And then she found cameras. He had got obsessed about cameras. And so he had 50 or 60 cameras. And he was a terrible photographer. And then she found toolboxes full of screwdrivers. I mean, he was just... And he actually became an expert in opera and was the classical music buyer for Tower Records when Tower was a big deal. And, and so the world is blessed by us strange people with our fascinations and our obsessions. So I'm happy for your obsession and that you're a writer.
Well, eccentricity is important. I think, especially in the media landscape where you could become these personalities or the fact that we would be more open to different crazinesses and obsessions. And I think, people who are eccentric people are a bit off often have something, right? The people who are just straight and narrow don't have. So I've always gravitated towards weird people, eccentric people, and people who are a little bit off. And because I found you find a lot of humanity in people like that, even if they're very.
So I would say, so Zoom, when you're done recording this, Zoom will compile it all.
Yeah.
I can send you the link to it. There's kind of a share. If I've got more subscribers, and if you just post this on yours, and even if I just link to it, a lot of people won't see it. Mm-hmm. So post this on your YouTube. Get me the recording file. I'll post it on mine.
Yeah.
And then if that's okay with you.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
Because otherwise, a lot of people won't see it, and there will be nerds out there like us who will enjoy this conversation, and they'll be working in the garden or driving their truck or washing the dishes, and they'll enjoy hearing us ramble about Jordan Peterson.
Right. So, we're in it for the nerds as much as anything
exactly
else.
Right. We are in it for the nerds. and we're all going to stop eating everything but beef, and we're going to wear 3-piece suits, especially that green one. And
no. That's not the real imitation of Christ. That's that's the wrong way to do it, isn't it?
That is the wrong way to do it. But all the nerds do it the wrong way. It's
That's
just
true.
how we are.
Yeah, we imitate, don't we? Yeah.
We do.
Well, thanks
thank
so
you,
much for the time, and it was a great pleasure, Paul.
Yeah, and if you're ever interested in doing this again, I get the sense that both of us are just as sick as the other. And
Yeah.